I'm going to hand over to Diane to introduce Debbie. Thank you.
I first met the Banks family in 1992 when my first husband and I moved to Montrose. Robin and Anne Banks were always so nice and helpful, and I'm not surprised that Debbie is so active in trying to save our wildlife and make sure they're well looked after. Debbie, welcome, and just begin your talk whenever you like.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much to everyone at the Kirriemuir Rotary for inviting me to join you this evening. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully it will work. Can you see a presentation?
Yep.
Okay. Right. I'm with an organization called the Environmental Investigation Agency. We were founded in 1984. We're headquartered in London, and we were set up to investigate, document, and expose environmental crime and abuse. And I run the campaign for tigers. And that is what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. I'm going to run through a little bit of just a bit of background to the status of wild tigers today and the threats that they face. A little bit about why tigers matter, why should we bother saving them, who's going to save the wild tiger, a little bit about our work, and finish on what we can all do as global citizens to help save the wild tiger. I do warn that there are some images that are quite gruesome, but this is the hard reality of what we're dealing with, so it's a warning up front. And I'm also going to just give you a little flavor of different aspects. So of course you can ask any questions at the end, or we can go back and discuss things in a little bit more depth once I've given you a little introduction. So in terms of how many wild tigers there are left today, we're a catastrophic decline, 96% in just over the last 100 years. In the last 60 years, we've lost tigers from Java and Bali and from the Caspian region. In just the last 10 years, we've lost tigers from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. And in Malaysia and Myanmar, they are facing a major poaching crisis at the moment, with Vietnamese poachers coming in from outside to snare and trap their tigers. Tigers are doing well, however, in countries like India, which is home to over half of the world's remaining wild tigers, and we'll talk a little bit about why that might be. Nepal and the Russian Far East, tigers are also stabilizing. Those populations are stabilizing and starting to show signs of recovery. So it's a mixture of good and bad news, and that's based on conservation philosophy and law and practice in the different countries. So the history of the wild tiger decline really starts in colonial times, with the sport hunting of tigers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries across the whole of Asia. And then that was followed up by Western fashion markets right up until the 1970s. People were wearing tiger skin coats. In the 1950s in China, Chairman Mao declared tigers an agricultural pest and put a bounty on their heads, and that nearly wiped them out. But in more recent times, since the 1980s at least, it's the demand for the bones of tigers, which are used in traditional Chinese medicine, has become like a major driving force of extinction. So those recent extinctions in Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia are driven by demand in China, and the poaching and trafficking of the world's remaining wild tigers is really driven still today by demand from China. tigers are not just killed for their bones. In the late 90s, there was a huge surge in the poaching of tigers and leopards for their skins, and these were being trafficked into Tibet. And in 2004, 2005, EIA, along with our partners, the Wildlife Protection Society of India, traveled to Tibet and documented just what exactly was happening there. And we found that there was a huge demand among Tibetans to use tiger, leopard and otter skin to decorate their traditional costumes called chupa. And these are costumes that they would wear at festival times and at weddings. We went to one of these horse festivals, summer horse festivals in 2005. It's very much like Highland Games. It's where people from across this very remote area would come together. There's a lot of horse trading, quite literally. People would meet potential husbands and wives. And there was a great display of wealth. People were stepping out of SUV vehicles. Their clothes were covered in entire tiger skins and leopard skins. They're wearing ivory, coral, turquoise, gold. So there was clearly a lot of money involved in this trade. But as we spoke to people, we learned that most of the individuals who were wearing costumes decorated with tiger skins didn't know that tigers were endangered. They didn't know it was illegal. They didn't know that the tiger was killed specifically for that purpose. This is Tibet. There's a lot of Chinese government censorship. And in fact, a lot of what was driving the trade was Chinese government policy. They wanted the outside world to see Tibetans prospering under Chinese rules. So you had this very perverse Chinese government policy that was actually enabling and encouraging people to effectively break the law. So we documented what was happening, and we then took our information to the office of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and he took matters into his own hands, and just months later issued an appeal from within India to Tibetans everywhere to stop wearing skins. It's not traditional that an entire tiger skin might be used to decorate a costume. In ancient times, the kings of Tibet would maybe reward a victorious warrior with a small patch of skin, as a symbol of his strength and courage. But this use of an entire skin is something that really only started happening in the late 90s and early 2000s. And after he spoke out from within India, his message was carried across the Himalayas, and within days, people started to destroy their skins, to burn their skins. And so it was a very, encouraging time at the power of the right words from the right person, and we started to see a massive and significant decline in the use of tiger skins for this purpose. Tigers are also threatened, of course, as a result of habitat loss, deforestation for timber, for mining, for dams, for roads and railways, and along with the hunting of tiger prey species such as deer and wild boar. Those geographic and habitat threats increase the vulnerability of tigers to poaching for trade in their body parts, but it also increases the chances of conflict with communities. But I'm not going to talk too much about the habitat threat tonight, just in the interest of time. So why do tigers matter? With all the horrors that we face in the world today, why should we care about tigers? Well, apart, of course, from their intrinsic and aesthetic value, tigers are important because they are symbols of the health of the environment they live in. They live in the same ecosystems and forests that secure water for millions of people and mitigate climate change. In India, for example, they're known as the striped water god. And of course, under COVID, they're a symbol actually of how well or how bad we are managing our global environment, which COVID is a reminder of how badly we are doing on that front. They're also a symbol of our efforts to fight corruption. Corruption facilitates every aspect of tiger poaching and trade, from poorly paid forest guards who turn a blind eye to poachers, or officials who might tamper with evidence and witnesses in court cases, or even judges who get paid off to dismiss cases. Tigers are also important in terms of income generation, particularly for local communities. There's one tigress in India, a very famous tigress, Machli. It was estimated that she generated millions of dollars of tiger tourism income just for the state of Rajasthan. So tigers can often pay for themselves. But of course, we've seen how fragile tourism is, with this unprecedented disruption to the world under COVID. And we're also very fortunate in countries like India, where the government actually pays for the forest guards and for the forest staff out of its own budget, unlike many other parts of the world, including other tiger range countries, where the funding for forest guards and forest protection comes from conservation organizations or comes from directly from tourism. So it's very important, and the successes that we see are in the countries where the government is very invested in tiger conservation. Tigers are also very important because they, apart from the local employment that they can bring through tourism, they can also employ, local staff as forest guards and forest watchers. And that brings also with it an element of, local pride. And, we've seen quite a few conservation projects working with local communities, where it's created that sense of ownership amongst the communities. Very simple things like giving camera traps to farmers so that they can start documenting tigers and other wildlife moving through their fields, and then creating a WhatsApp group so they start sharing news and information with each other and with the forest department, and so people can start to within a network monitor the movements of tigers and make sure they're safe. And a byproduct of that has been this particular community of farmers feeling like it's their tigers and they're out to protect their tigers, and they're not letting any minors come in, and they're not allowing, or when strangers come in, they'll report them to the forest department. So there's lots of ways that tigers benefit people and people benefit tigers. It's not all bad news. And another reason that tigers are doing better in India than in other parts of Asia is because of culture. The image on the left is of the Hindu goddess Durga, who rides on a tiger. It's her vehicle. So there's a very strong religious and cultural connection to tigers. There's also a very ancient connection among many of the indigenous peoples across India, where communities still revere or fear, respect and invoke the tiger in many different ways, whether that's body painting themselves with tigers and dancing themselves into a trance to invoke tiger spirits, all the way through to amazing stories from the northeast of India, where one particular community see the tiger as blood brothers and protect the tigers in their forests. So it's a subcontinent of many fascinating stories, but certainly the cultural connections have led to amazing tolerance amongst the people of India, who actually have to live with these big predators. And as I say, tigers are very much a symbol of how well or how bad we are managing the planet. And while India is making some progress, we're losing tigers elsewhere, and we're losing them in countries where they're just treated as a commodity, and valued more for their sum total of their body parts, than what they represent alive and in the wild. And tigers are just one species among a million that is facing extinction under this current global biodiversity and climate crisis. And the emergence of SARS-CoV-2 and the COVID-19 pandemic is very much symptomatic of this biodiversity and climate crises. It's symptomatic of our toxic and destructive relationship with nature. And tigers, the recovery of tigers would be a symbol and an indication that we are making progress in reversing that toxic relationship. So who's going to save tigers? And how do we bring ourselves, the tigers and the planet, back from the brink of destruction? Communities, the people who live with tigers are the number one stakeholders. And we really must learn to listen better to Indigenous knowledge. There are communities, as I say, in the northeast of India and elsewhere that have lived alongside tigers, and not in a rosy romantic sense, but they have found a way to manage life with each other. And we need to harness that knowledge and skills and share it across the rest of India and other tiger range countries in Asia. Governments are absolutely key, because they're the ones that are making decisions and can take decisions, not just tiger range country governments, but our government as well, when we think about where we procure various minerals and timber from. But governments have a key role to play in stopping land conversion to protect and rewild nature. Now that sounds like it could cost a lot of money to make a choice between building a dam or mining an area to extract minerals, but of course we have to now think about what the cost of COVID has been. It's cost the global economy $5.8 trillion, and just 1% of that could finance a transformative change, a paradigm shift in how we relate to nature and how we better respect, protect, and restore nature. Because of the trade aspects, it's obviously very important that we have effective enforcement. So, not just going after low-hanging fruit or low-level criminals, but going after the heads of the criminal networks that are operating between countries. These are organized, serious criminal networks, often involved in other crime types. And it's not rocket science. It just, it's using the same skills and tactics and technology that police and financial investigators use to address narcotics or human trafficking, can also be applied to combat tiger and other, wildlife crime. And again, under COVID, we have seen how important it is that we treat wildlife crime seriously. So what is EIA doing to contribute to the fight to save the tiger? Well, as a campaigning organization, we want to see changes. We want to see more effective enforcement. We want to see better laws and policies. And we need to gather information and evidence about what is happening. How is the tiger trade working, so that we can inform law enforcement agencies of where to focus their attentions and their efforts, and to inform politicians and government ministers about specific actions that countries should be taking, to inform donors about where they should be investing their money in supporting countries in fighting tiger and other wildlife crime. We've got two geographic areas that we focused on. One is the sort of what we call the trans-Himalayan trade, and looking at the criminal networks that are operating between India, Nepal, and China. And we're also looking at the trade in the Mekong region, so between Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and into China. And in that particular region, we're also not just looking at the trade in wild tigers, but we're looking at the role of tiger farming. And this is a major threat to tigers. This is where tigers are kept in captive facilities. They're bred at a sort of commercial, intensive scale because they're cats and they can breed well in captivity. And then their body parts are traded. And contrary to the assertion of some economists, this is not flooding the market with a cheap alternative to wild tiger. It's not relieving pressure on the wild tiger. It's actually stimulating demand for tigers. It's perpetuating the desirability of tiger parts and products in these markets. So quickly, what are tigers being killed for? Well, I've mentioned their bones are used to make traditional Chinese medicine, and that's used to treat rheumatism and arthritis in China. Amongst Vietnamese consumers, the bones are boiled down into this glue-like substance that you see in the middle there, which is then dropped into tea or wine and again taken as a medicine. But their bones are also used for decoration. These are tail bones that might be threaded through with ribbon as an amulet or some sort of token, and they're also used to make bracelets. Tiger bones are also soaked in big vats of wine with ginseng and other ingredients to make a strengthening tonic that is consumed across Southeast Asia and in China. It's often packaged in sort of fancy bottles and given as a sort of prestigious gift or a non-financial bribe. And in addition to being taken as a general strengthening tonic, in some places it's also marketed as a male virility product. Skins are also in demand. They may not be used by the Tibetans to decorate their costumes anymore, but they're still being used as sort of luxury home decor, a sort of status symbol, if you like, amongst the wealthy in China. And offcuts are used to make wallets. Tiger teeth and claws are actually very high value and low risk because they're easy to conceal and dispatch. People can carry them across borders easily. They can go into passenger luggage or be posted and couriered. And they're actually, according to many of the traders that we've met with, amongst the first items to be sold from a tiger carcass because they get one tiger tooth, one raw canine is worth the equivalent of about $1,000. So they can very quickly recoup and very easily recoup their capital outlay on the purchase of a tiger carcass. There's also a market for tiger meat primarily amongst Chinese consumers as an exotic delicacy. An offshoot of the captive tiger industry, the tiger farming industry, has been the high mortality of tiger cubs. It's not clear from these images or from circumstances whether these are animals that cubs that have died in infancy naturally because the tigers are malnourished and kept in terrible conditions, or whether they've been deliberately killed. But there is a growing market, because there's a growing supply, for the use of tigers in vats of wine with other ingredients like snakes, scorpions, pangolin scales, bear paws. And that's quite popular in Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia, where like the village headman might have a jar with a tiger cub in it. Again, as a sort of status symbol, he'll serve that wine to his guests. So how are people accessing tiger parts and products? There are still some physical markets, so shops and particularly in border areas, the border areas between China and Burma, for example, or China and Laos. And even within the capital, Vientiane, capital of Laos, Vientiane, there are still shops that are selling, tiger bone wine and tiger teeth, and relatively openly. You know, it's either, it's not quite as open as you see here. This is in northern Laos, but you know, under a glass counter or in a back room, and it's not hard to find in some of these persistent hotspots for the trade. It's not hard to find. So if we can find it as investigators, then you know, law enforcement should be able to find it too. But a lot of the trade has moved online, and our Vietnamese and Chinese investigators are finding a lot of tiger parts and products along with other wildlife being offered for sale on Facebook, on WeChat, which is a Chinese social media platform, Zalo, which is a Vietnamese platform, and very often, and this is where it gets a little bit gruesome, very often traders will post a video like that on their Facebook or WeChat pages just so that they can convince prospective buyers that they have genuine tiger. So the other thing that we do is we collect information on seizures. So you know, we try and tell a full picture. The seizures tell us you know, information about where there is enforcement activity, and that's obviously impacted by a number of different factors: enforcement effort, how well it's reported, how accessible those reports are to an organisation like ours. But they give us, you know, a picture of what's happening, but it's very much a tip of the iceberg situation. And like as with any contraband, what's being seized is a fraction of what's actually being moved. But along with the seizure data and our observations about the trade, our investigative findings, it helps to build up a picture of the trade routes and the methods of concealment and the methods of transportation, how money is exchanging hands by cash, by online transfers, etc. So all of that helps to inform law enforcement. And I just want to talk very briefly, just to put things in scale. You know, I mentioned at the beginning that there are about 4,000 wild tigers left in the world today. There are twice that many in captivity in pretty horrendous conditions in Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, and China alone. And as I say, trade in the parts and derivatives of these animals is stimulating demand and perpetuating the desirability of tigers. Now, you have some consumers who, you know, just in the same way, there's a preference in this country for wild salmon over farmed salmon. Many consumers have a preference for wild tiger over captive bred tigers, because they see wild tigers as being, you know, more fearsome, more, you know, more effective, and they want to harness those properties. So as I mentioned, tiger farming has actually been a disaster for wild tigers. And in 2007, the international community said it should be phased out and stopped. But we are dealing with extreme intransigence in China, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, and it continues to be an uphill battle to get them to change their policies. And you know, we've, you know, even very recently we've released reports on this. We worked with the BBC to help them make a documentary on it. And you know, in complete juxtaposition to the beauty of wild tigers, you have these horrendous conditions, which is completely unnatural to have, you know, so many tigers. I mean, they're a solitary animal in the wild. Very unnatural to have them in these conditions, in these concrete bunkers. It serves absolutely no conservation purpose at all. Oh. Now, how do I move on to the next slide? So what are we calling for? Well, we're calling for more effective enforcement to disrupt the kingpins of this trade and to seize their assets, you know, to put the players at the top of the trade behind bars. And of course, we want to see changes in laws that end tiger farming, and we want to see real leadership from China in particular. because if President Xi Jinping comes on board and declares an end to tiger farming and a zero tolerance towards the use of tiger parts and products, then it's going to have a huge impact. At the moment, countries like China still have a domestic market for tiger parts and products from farmed tigers, and as I say, that is keeping this demand alive. So there's a lot of policy actions we want to see. And what can we all do to help save wild tigers? Well, we've been working with the UK Parliament and the UK government, and actually the UK has been one of the, along with India and the United States and some of the other European member states, has been at the forefront of calling for an end to tiger farming. And we really need to keep that pressure on, particularly as we are in a sort of post-COVID, post-Brexit world, and there are so many other things vying for the government's attention. We need our network to be writing to their MPs and urging them to urge the government in the UK and elsewhere to take a really strong stand on this. So I'm always happy to help if somebody wants to do any letter writing. And there's things that we can do to make sure that we don't patronize some of these tiger farms by accident. Many of these facilities have the facade of being a zoo or a center for conservation, but I can guarantee anywhere that lets you as a visitor handle or cuddle a tiger or have a selfie taken with it is not a center for conservation. Those tigers can never go into the wild. They're too habituated to people. They're often inbred, and in some cases they're often drugged and have their claws removed. There's no way that they could be, there's no way they can contribute to conservation. And whether it's in Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, or China, these facilities that allow this kind of activity are hiding a more sinister business. So that's one thing that we can all do, is make sure we don't give them our money when we go on holiday to those countries. And the other thing that we can all do is spread the word. As I say, we worked with the BBC to help them put together a documentary that's still available on iPlayer for the rest of the year. It's International Tiger Day next Wednesday, the 29th of July. So you can encourage all your friends to celebrate it by watching the BBC documentary. And as I say, spreading the word can mean just talking to anyone and everyone. And I was very fortunate to get to talk to the Duke of Cambridge, who is a tiger fan and is genuinely doing what he can to raise the profile of tiger and other wildlife crimes. So you never know where these conversations will take you. And I've run over time, so I'm going to say thank you very much, and any questions?
Thanks very much, Debbie. I'm sure a really interesting talk.
Debbie, could you stop sharing your screen, please, so that we can see everybody?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great, thanks.
If you have a question for Debbie, if you can stick your hand up and we'll go around the room. And I think Bob Harley was probably up first there.
Thanks, Debbie, for a great presentation. The tiger is my favourite animal. I've been to India 9 times and visited a tiger reservation in West Bengal, but unfortunately didn't see any. I have seen them in Calcutta Zoo and was astounded by the size of the white tiger. It's as big as a polar bear. And I have a couple of facts about tigers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but their stripes are like our fingerprints. They're unique. Yes. And they're monogamous, unlike lions that have a harem. What do you think of the World Wildlife Fund? They've persuaded me to sponsor a tiger for £3 a month. Are they a good organisation?
Yeah, we work with WWF. They're a much bigger organisation than ours, and we have an advantage that we don't have countries and different offices, so we can often say and do things that it's difficult for them to do. So we work in a partnership whereby, we will speak truth to power and expose what's really going on, and then they can work with governments in a more soft diplomatic kind of way. So if you think about us as the bad cops and WWF as the good cops, we'll expose what's going on and catalyze some action that creates a space for WWF and many others. There are a lot of organizations working in tiger conservation, playing very different roles. So we do try to work with as many as we can. I would actually, just on the tiger monogamy, just a little interesting story is that sometimes tigresses can be very clever. You'll be aware that if a male tiger gets in a fight with another male tiger and they're fighting for territory, the new male, if he wins, will go around and kill the cubs of the former male. So sometimes there are some tigresses, people have been monitoring their behavior quite closely, who are very clever and will mate with all of the tigers in the area. So no matter who wins in a fight, that male will assume that the cubs are his, and it increases the security of those cubs and the reproductivity of the area. So they're not necessarily as monogamous as we think.
Thank you. Ronnie.
Thanks very much, David. Very lovely talk, very informative, very thought-provoking. I was fortunate enough to be out in Malaya in the late 60s and early 70s, and one day on patrol we actually spotted the tiger's pug mark near where they must be going to drink. And we could often hear, well, what we suspected might be tigers during the night. And we wondered why, but one of the things you said about them looking after wild boar, that kind of answered the question after all these years, because we knew that wild boar used to follow us and they would root up where we'd set up a camp for the night, although we had buried all the stuff quite deep and everything else. If you ever went back there, it was all rooted up. But obviously, they were following the wild boar, not following us, and that was it. The other thing, of course, when you talked about medicine, whereas in Hong Kong and in Malaya, there was an oriental balm or cream, and it was called tiger balm. Now, I don't know if it had any tiger products in it. I don't think so, because it was kind of like camphor oil, but the guy who marketed that using the tiger as a sort of marketing tool, he made a fortune, and they had these lovely gardens, tiger balm gardens, and both in Singapore and in Hong Kong. And the other thing, when you mentioned about the tribes people wearing tiger skins, well, I was a soldier as an infantryman, and our regiment, we didn't wear tiger skins, the big drummers, it was leopard skins. But the Gordon Highlanders, who actually spent a long time in the northwest frontier at the sort of turn of the 19th, 20th century, their big drummers wore tiger skins, and did so up until probably about the 1980s, I think. And you know, it goes for that time. And the last thing I was going to say, I mean, I'm like Bob. I've got a great affinity and affection for all sort of wildlife, and I am the Angus Council's champion for the Scottish tiger eye, Scottish wildcat, which was in a similar position, you know, loss of habitat and everything else. And I saw it in the layer where they cut down jungle and planted oil palm and rubber. You know, the animals were being forced further and further away. Lucky Malay at that time still had fair stretches of jungle, but it's very, very sad, and I do hope that we redress that balance, and you know, the wild animals get the chance to regenerate. But thank you for your lovely talk.
No, thank you for your story. I mean, it must have been quite exciting to know that whilst you were in the Malay jungle, there was a tiger on your tail. It probably saw you and you never saw it. So very exciting times. And you and Bob should go to, I was going to say, Bob, the Ranthambore Tiger Reserve in India. If you want to see wild tigers, it's one of the best places to go.
Whose hand was up there first? I'll go with Mulrooney. I'll come back to you, Mike.
Never mind a tiger on your tail. In the 1970s, there was a campaign, Tan Tiger Agbo Hank, which was Gaelic for I have a tiger in my tank. And I think it was Esso. Anyone remember that? Those stickers, a tiger in my tank. Anyway, that was just a comment. I bow to Mike. Well, not really bow, but you know what I mean.
You can if you want, Malcolm. Debbie, really interesting talk. I do wonder, do you find a sort of reluctance at a sort of governmental level that, you know, you've got a Western organisation effectively coming in and investigating what goes on in the Far Eastern countries and looking at their sort of, and sort of commenting on their traditions and what they do?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. I mean, we do have, because we don't have offices in other countries, we do work through local partnerships. And the work that we're doing in Thailand, Vietnam, China, there's some organizations that we openly work with. So we'll put joint reports together. In China, we have to be a bit more careful, you know, and the people that we work with, we have to make sure they're not exposed. But there is, you know, I think it's, when we're talking about China, we're talking a lot about the government and the government policies. We're talking about corporate China and criminals in China. Many people, but clearly not enough yet, but many people in China, members of the public, are changing their minds about some of these uses and practices. And that's what, you know, some of our behind the scenes partners will do. The local organizations, they'll work on demand reduction campaigns, awareness campaigns, and our exposés can sort of, you know, catalyze and fuel that, you know, blaze a bit of a trail and let, you know, others come in and mop up the mess type thing that we might you know, leave in our wake. But the other advantage that we have is that countries like India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, they hate tiger farming because they can see that it's keeping demand alive and that's putting their wild tigers at risk. So actually a lot of the times, the information that we're gathering and putting together in reports and so forth, we're giving it to governments who will go out and be advocates and be champions for the tiger themselves. But yeah, no, definitely, you know, there are individuals within the government in China that really don't like us very much.
Thank you. Any further questions? Eric?
Debbie, again, as I would say, an excellent talk. Have you always been involved with tigers, or how did you get involved with the EIA? Has it been a long journey for you, or is it something fairly recent?
No, I've been with EIA since 1996, but I'm hoping my mum and dad do not unmute, but I've always loved wildlife and animals, so I went and I studied zoology at Aberdeen Uni. I did a master's in conservation down at UCL in London. So it's, you know, wildlife has always been something I've been fascinated by, and the tiger just, you know, once it gets inside your soul, there's no escaping. But yeah, I volunteered for a while whilst at the beginning of my time at EIA, so it's just creating opportunities to get into the things that you really want to do.
Okay. Heather, you had your hand up.
Yes, it was a fascinating talk, thoroughly enjoyed it, but I wonder how much you feel under pressure and also threatened when you're maybe in some of these countries?
I think we're always under pressure because the interest, the industrial scale interest of the tiger farming industry, the Chinese pharmaceutical industry, that's always huge pressure. I mean, ironically, under COVID and how governments may or may not choose to build back greener, we might find that we get more traction on some of these issues. Governments recognise that SARS-CoV-2 emerged from wildlife, probably Chinese horseshoe bats, before being transmitted to an intermediary host animal, possibly pangolins. Nothing's 100% right now, but certainly governments are recognising that the way we treat nature, we destroy habitats, we capture and kill animals, we create the interfaces for the spillover of zoonotic disease, whether that's through viruses or bacteria, and then the costs are enormous in terms of human lives and economic costs. So we might find, as governments think about the future, that they start to see the connection between a healthy planet for people is fundamentally a healthy planet, and what we're doing to the planet right now is not healthy. So that might take some of the pressure off. In terms of risk, we're always very careful. We've got people who've worked for the UK police and intelligence community on our team. So we plan for risk and we take measures to mitigate risk. And to look after our staff in the field. So yes, there's risk, but we again, my mum's on this call.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, so my apologies for being late. I'm just curious, it's quite easy to sort of lobby governments via the political sphere, but if you go down the back streets of Hong Kong or Singapore, it's amazing how and what you can find to buy. And how do you educate, or how do you think you can educate a generation and maybe the next generation who just see medicines as the whatever cures they think they have? Where could the education part of what you're trying to do come in rather than the government level of things?
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly as an organisation ourselves, education is definitely not our expertise, but we can make sure that the organisations who are involved in sort of targeted consumer behaviour change campaigns have as much information as possible about who is buying what and what motivates them to do so. And the more that we can understand that, the more that they can tailor their programs. And a lot of that, can be very clever marketing and engaging professional behavior change specialists, engaging the marketing and advertising agencies, making sure things are not covered with, NGO logos and branding. But there are some campaigns, not so much on tigers, because there just has not been the investment in tigers globally. But say for rhinos in Vietnam, rhino horn was being used to treat cancer, but also to as a hangover cure, and even a pre-drinking session, like a preventative measure. And it's also being used again as some sort of status. You might gift rhino horn to your boss or something like that. So there was a whole series of campaigns that were run and led by high-profile Vietnamese businessmen, sort of turning down business colleagues and peers if they were offering them rhino horn as a sort of gift or a bribe or some kind of thing. And it was apparently quite effective. I mean, because it was the right person giving the message in a way that appealed to the motivations and the values of the consumers. So I hold my hand up and say it's just definitely not an area that we have any expertise in. But if, you know, all we can do is make sure the people that do have the expertise are hearing what we're hearing from the traders, because they're telling us, you know, what the changes are in the consumer demographics and the consumer preferences. And we can pass that on to people who can do something with it.
Thanks very much. There's no further questions. Then I'm going to ask Diane to give a vote of thanks.
Well, Debbie, it was just such an informative talk and quite fascinating. And I just want to say it sounds like there is a lot of education, educating everybody in the general population, educating governments, educating companies, everything, so that these animals are not used for bribes or as pseudo medicines when they clearly aren't. So thank you very much for your really, really good work. And can I ask everybody to thank you in the usual way?
Thank you very much. No, it's been my pleasure. And as I say, if anyone wants to do any letter writing, I'm always on hand to help with some words.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Very interesting talk, as Diane has said. Also thank your mum and dad for joining us, Chris and Robin. Can't see much of your dad. I see his hand there. Keeping it. We must be camera shy. Thanks again. We've got a little bit of business to attend to. I promise I won't keep the members too long.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and nice to see you all, and I hope to see you in person sometime soon. Thanks.
Bye, Debbie.
Bye.
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 Bye, Anne and Robin. Bye.
Bye.